Welcome to Marketing for Book Coaches, the show where we explore marketing techniques that will set your book coaching business apart. Are you a book coach considering setting up a podcast, but you're at a loss on what topic would interest your audience? Well, stay tuned because that is exactly what we will be talking about today. I'm Anne, your host and a business coach, helping both book coaches build thriving businesses. Before we go any further, this is the second episode of a two-part series on podcasting for book coaches. If you want to hear about the technical aspects of setting up a podcast, head over to my previous episode with Jen Rogers. The link will be in the description. But back to our podcast episode of today. And to help us figure out the topic of your podcast as a book coach, I am joined by a podcast coach for authors. She helps nonfiction authors reach more readers as a podcast host and a guest. She also has her own podcast, the Book Marketing Mania. Let's get ready for an exciting discussion with Kim Stewart. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Anne. How are you? This is so fun.
Yes, I know, especially as you mentioned it, you're in Dallas, I'm in Singapore. We're at the other end of the world. So yes, this is going to be very exciting.
Only made possible through a podcast. I mean, this is like genius, right? I mean, and there's no way I would have met you otherwise, right? I mean, it's crazy.
You know, you never know. You never know. Maybe we would have met at the zoo or something like this when you're here. So before I officially launch the episode, a little bit of a warning. So today the episode is structured differently because Kim, she works with authors who have written a book and who want to use that book to do a podcast. So in line with that, we decided to structure the podcast episode around the book on writing techniques. However, and please interrupt me if I'm wrong here, Kim, it doesn't mean that as a book coach, you need to have written a book before you can launch a podcast. If you have written a book, your book will be your life experience, your coaching knowledge, your expertise, anything you would like to talk about in a podcast. And with Kim, we'll figure out a couple of tips on how you can identify the best topic for your podcast. So please continue listening, even if you haven't written that book yet. So the book I chose for this podcast episode is I Am Boa Kulak and the Art of Writing, written by Josephine Shaw. So it's part memoir, part a writing manual. And the premise is that she's comparing the process of writing with the process of making her favorite mom chicken dish, Ayam Boak Kelok. It's absolutely a thrilling read, and I cannot advise you anything more than just go and read it. So after that long introduction, let's get to you, Kim, and use your expertise. First question, if Josephine would sit here in front of you as a book coach, where would you start to help her figure out the different podcast angles she could take based upon her book?
Yeah, I always recommend to start with what your goals are as an author. And, you know, it's easy just to think we're just going to take the topic of the book, right? Which is the message of our podcast. But I really think it depends on what your goal is for your podcast as an author. So it could be, I'm going to talk about this topic in my book, and I'm hoping to attract and, nurture readers so that they will hopefully buy the book. Or I might have like a specific goal in mind. And I think this comes to like the time factor too with authors. They don't want to spend all their time podcasting, right? They want to use the medium and get their message out, but they don't want it to take all their time. So that's why I always say, start with your goals first. But it might be like, you might be doing it in a season where you're trying to grow your email list, so you can do a certain promotion. Maybe there's a certain season that works with your book and you want to do a promotion. So you want to grow your email list. Maybe you want to grow relationships like what Anne and I are doing. And so in that case, you're thinking in your mind, I want to have guests on the show because I want to build relationships. So the message might change a little bit. Or you just straight up might want to sell your book on your episodes. So I think that's important to think of one of those four goals in mind when you start a show, because you're going to measure it that way. And so like with this memoir, well, it's a memoir and, a lesson on writing. I mean, it's all about being creative. There's a couple of different ways you could go about it. And so, you could talk about the journey of, and this is for any writer, right? The journey of writing the book, how, all the creativity that went into it. And she talks about cooking too, and, combines all those things. And so she could just say, okay, I'm going to, have a bunch of solo episodes, and it's only going to be me on there, and I'm just going to talk about my message, and hopefully I'll attract and nurture readers, my potential readers as well as my existing audience, and maybe have a lead magnet to share with them, through the episodes, and so you could grow your email list. So it's all topical about things that are in the book specifically. So you're kind of like breaking down the lessons learned, but you can always sprinkle in extras. Maybe there's some extra lessons that she learned about creativity that she didn't put in the book. And again, I always think about seasons of life or seasons of the year. There might be things that pop up in her mind that's like, oh, when you're going through these seasons, this is when writing and cooking and, being creative come into play. And so, but I always think too, like, but if you're wanting to build relationships, with other people that might be other creatives, which is a wonderful thing for all of us to listen to, you might want to bring people on the show. And so you might be talking a little bit more about their creativity as well. So you're kind of blending it. But I always say, make sure that it's you first, right? You're the host of the show. And so you kind of a mission for the show to talk about something specifically. So if it's about your book, your memoir, the lessons in there, are what stand up first. But then when you bring people onto the show, you're kind of weaving them into that mission of the podcast. And so what can they bring, to this show that you've established? So what topics can they bring? And so it's nice because you can still map out your topics as a host, but then you're like, okay, where can I have extra people come in and just talk with me on this topic I want to talk about and just enrich it a little bit more. So I hope that kind of answers your question. It might be kind of a long-winded answer, but
no.
That's what I kind of think of Anne, as doing it that way.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, because her book as well is so rich. There's so many things. Like she speaks about writing, but she speaks also about her love of yoga. She came out of an abusive marriage, so it's also a story of redemption.
Wow, yeah,
exactly. And one of the, because you're talking a lot about seasons. So are you authors like generally going for a small podcast of like a small podcast? Like we do just a 6-part podcast, or we do a longer podcast? How do they do? Because I guess once you have the book, I think Josephine's book, she could do like 10 podcasts on it for 10 years.
Yeah.
Once you got the book and you have your podcast on that book, do you limit it to a certain determined amount of episodes, or you can do it longer? And how do you do that if you do it longer?
Yeah. And you can do both. As you know, there's all kinds of podcasts out there. And that's what I love about podcasting. It's your own show. You do it your way, and it can change along the way. And so like what you're talking about with a limited time, I've heard it called a capsule podcast. So it's a limited number of episodes, but it's public for anybody to consume. And so it really depends, again, on what your goals that you're trying to accomplish. And then I always like to think about your time, because we don't want something that's going to take up all of our time and then we're going to dread doing it, right? So think about how, if you listen to podcasts, if you bought into podcasting as a great way to market my book, then now think about how much time do I have to devote to this? How can podcasting fit into my schedule? Because we both know there's so many other things you're going to be doing too. So you want it to fit into your schedule. And again, so like look at your goals and then figure out, could I get away with just doing a limited time show? And so I set, like I love 12. I mean, I think like 12 episodes is a great number. You might do less, you might do more, but you can sit down and batch all those topics, especially if you're doing it solo. And then you could have it out on your podcast. And then from then on, it can just sit there as a marketing asset. And then you can just go talk about it everywhere you go. So if you're guesting on podcast, you can mention your own podcast for them to listen to. If you're guest blogging or doing videos like what we're doing, anywhere you're out sharing your message, you can always, the call to action can be to go listen to this podcast that you already have, however many episodes up and running, where people could just binge through and get a feel for your book. Or it might be something that they listen to after they bought the book. Maybe they want to go deeper and hear more about the book. And so they could do that. Or if you're like, I'm totally down for podcasting and I want to do it on an ongoing basis, especially if you're like trying to build relationships, then you might decide to do, a podcast that airs every week. Or you may say, I'm only going to do it once a month, but I'm going to keep doing it, but I'm only going to do it once a month, or you might do it seasonally, where it's just like certain seasons you air episodes, and you batch them ahead and get them done. And then they air at a certain time. It's so flexible. That's what I love about podcasting for sure. It's just so flexible. Yeah.
I like this idea of the capsule podcast, especially
Mhm.
for those of you who are book coaches and who haven't written your book yet.
Mhm.
This could be an excellent example. You do like, even you can just record what, 4, 6 episodes
Yeah,
on
yeah.
your expertise or on a certain way of writing it, and that can
Mhm.
be like your lead magnet or your first step for people
Mhm.
to come into your business. So I've never heard the term of capsule
Yeah,
podcast
and
before, by the way. So I was like, oh.
I cannot apologize. I can't remember her name. Her first name is Betsy, is where the Betsy Wallace is the very first person I ever heard this from. And I've heard it called other things since then, but she kind of coined that term several years ago called a capsule podcast. And she did it with cookbook authors. And so it was basically like somebody would write a cookbook and then they would have this podcast and it's like, 6 to 10 episodes. And what they did was like you got your cookbook and then they would go talk to like people that had recipes in the cookbook, or like maybe there was like a certain spice that was real popular in the cookbook or a certain theme around that cookbook. And so it was kind of just, again, just like diving into the nature of what the book is about and the journey of it. And then how the reader is experiencing that cookbook, right? And get to just dive in more is what we want. We always want our readers to do that, right? So yeah, she coined that term and I just love it. I think it's really undervalued that a lot of people could be doing it. And like you said, you serve book coaches. And I think there's so many ways that book coaches could use a capsule podcast. So it could be, something that the reader or their potential client experiences before they hire them. Or it's something that just enriches some of the things they're working on, as they're writing their book and they get some additional lessons on a podcast. But yeah, it's just a great way for people that don't know you to get to know you and get to know your writing and your coaching. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea of the cooking capsule podcast. I will
Mhm.
have to send this to Josephine because Josephine,
Yeah.
she talks with so much enthusiasm and motivation about her cooking and the spices and where they get the ingredients.
Yeah.
This could absolutely be a great idea for her as a podcast.
Mhm.
But how do you balance your personal interest? Because, like, again, in this book, she talks about so many things,
Mhm.
and what your ideal audience actually wants to hear and to learn
Mhm.
about you.
Yeah, and I think again that goes back to your goals of it. Like if you're trying to sell this one book, then you're going to stick to something that's related to where if you're serving someone that hasn't bought the book yet, then you want to entice them to buy the book. So you don't want to be talking about, things that way out in left field that don't have anything to do with the book because then you're not going to see a return on your investment, right? But, once it's after the book, right? You could go off in different areas, but I would probably, not have it be a big free for all because you won't get as many people listening, because there's so many podcasts out there. We really want to see like
Yes,
what
yeah.
am I coming to this podcast for specifically?
Mm.
So I would probably keep it at least narrow in the beginning, and maybe pick out just three topical areas within the book that you want to talk about. And again, there's some that, may be really personal that you share in a book, but you don't necessarily want to talk about on a podcast,
Mm.
so you wouldn't pick those. But yeah, I would pick just maybe 3 to start with and just really hone in on those 3 and flesh them out. And then again, like I know a lot of people write more than one book. So maybe you have
Yeah, yeah.
another book burning up, that you're writing and working on now. And it's never too early to start talking about it. So that could be, and if you have a lead magnet set up, even if you don't have your book, you could start talking about that and start drawing in, future readers for that as well. But yeah, I would probably start really kind of narrow with maybe just 3 topics and stick to that for a while. Yeah. So you kind of get known for it. Like, you and me, we'd be talking, we'd be like, hey, have you listened to XYZ podcast? And this is why, we don't want it to be like, oh, it's just, a bunch of rambling about nothing because nobody wants to hear that.
Yeah, no, but because it is indeed, like you say, very difficult to be different from other writing podcasts because there's so many writing podcasts out there.
Mhm.
If this would be a book coach who hasn't written a book yet,
Mhm.
how would you advise them to find their 3 topical topics that both link to their personal interest, but also to what the audience wants?
Yeah, I would say it depends on what their expertise is. Like when you line up a lot of different book coaches that you serve, right? You probably know immediately which ones. Like like for me, I work with authors who want to podcast either as a host or guest. And so you may have book coaches that maybe they're better at just the big picture of helping somebody formulate a plan for their book. Maybe they're better at the editing piece of it. Maybe they're better at the marketing piece. Like there's so many different pieces of it. So it's not, I don't think every book coach looks the same, as you can attest to, I'm sure. So I think that's where you have to really hone in on what am I bringing to the table? Or if you're bringing on guests, what is a specific angle you want to talk about? But again, it would be back to your goal. Like if you're hoping this will entice people to sign up for me, book coaching with me, then you really have to, narrow it down to what are you offering, for people to take advantage of. So you can see, is this podcast working for me? Am I getting clients into my book coaching program?
Okay, great. I love that. It seems to me that you're talking a lot about niching as well, like to go as precise as possible. Am I understanding it right? Or you're like,
yeah, I love niching down. Now, a lot of people, people talk about it different nowadays. Like it's not so much like a topical niche, but it's more like who you serve. So like it, again, that might be another way too, is like book coaches serve authors, right? Or writers, they're not authors yet, maybe. So I think that's the thing too, is like you can niche down in what you offer, the service you're offering in your book coaching program, or it might be the audience you're trying to serve. Because there's a big difference, right? If you are, if you're a romance writer versus just a nonfiction business writer, there's all kinds of different book genres. So that may be too, like your book coaching podcast may be specific to the genre that you're focused on, which is great because it also helps you get into that world. So like you would start networking with authors that are in that genre, so whether they need your services or not, you might want to build relationships with them and be referable. So I think that would be another way you could kind of set yourself apart as a podcaster.
I love that you gave the example of romance because I did a little bit of research on that. There's so many different genres, like you say, in romance. Yeah. And I discovered the romance of romantasy. So it's fantasy with romance. I didn't even know it existed. So I'm discovering every day. Now that we're having this conversation, I'm like, this is a great niche, right? You can launch your podcast on romantasy and you can make it big and like because I guess there's so many things to talk about. Because
a lot of people, in the fiction world, a lot of people are like, this is how you write this kind of book, but it may not be from the angle of a book coach. You know what I mean? It might be just like somebody that's written a fiction book could talk about it, but a book coach, kind of looks at a bigger picture. But yeah, I mean, if that was your audience you want to serve, then that could definitely be the topic of your conversations on your podcast. Like, again, that would stand out from the other crowd if there's other book coaches that have podcasts. Well, this one talks about the book I want to write. So I'm going to listen to this podcast and get to know this book coach. So yeah, I think that's great. And there's so many different genres out there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's also the difficulty for a book coach that there's so many podcasts out there on writing. So how do you distinguish yourself? And I love that you talk about niching because I'm all about niching. I mean, this podcast is very niched as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, yay, that's a
and I think you'd be surprised, when you go look around at the different podcasts that are out there, because I did this with mine when I was like, okay, I want to talk about book marketing, but there's other book marketing podcasts out there. Like, how's mine going to be different? And what I noticed is a lot of the book marketing podcasts, they also talk about publishing. And I was like, okay, well, I haven't published yet myself, so I didn't really want to talk about publishing specifically. I talk about it from a marketing standpoint, but I didn't really want to talk about just like writing and publishing. So I think if you go look at, if you were just to pull up some of the book coaching podcasts, you might be surprised. When you look at them, you're like, oh, okay. When I look, it's just like with the authors, right? When they are coming up with their book ideas and they're looking at what other books are out there at the bookstore or on Amazon, you really start noticing, oh, I see all these books, but they're not covering it this way, or they're not covering, they're covering the same topic, but they're not covering the things I want to cover. So obviously my book has a place on the shelf, and same way with book coaches that want to have a podcast.
Oh, I love that, Kim. Like you say, indeed, it's like finding that angle. I know you probably don't work that much with book coaches, but are there any like specific angles or niches that you say like book coaches or even just others don't really go into that?
No, I mean, not that I can think of, just because I think there is a podcast on every possible topic you could think of out there, and especially for books. like if you just want to listen to podcasts about books, and meet some new authors and learn about some new books. I mean, the genre of that, the category of those kind of podcasts within the book category, there's so many. I mean, there's just so, like we sit here and go nonfiction, fiction, romance. I mean, I didn't realize, there's hundreds of categories within just romance, so there's all these podcasts talking about all these different topics. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. There's any that, somebody would, because obviously if you have a book coaching business and you're offering services to your clients who are authors, there's a podcast that is going to work, or maybe there's not, and you're going to create it, but there's definitely a need for it. I mean, I think almost everybody I meet nowadays listens to podcasts and consumes content that way or watches it on YouTube. So I think, that
yes,
there's definitely room for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Go for the niche and launch your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's say that we have found the topic of Josephine. Or she has several topics.
Yeah.
How does she go to test that with her audience before she launches the podcast? Or you're more like, just launch your podcast and see how it goes?
Yeah, you could do it either way. And I would say an easy way to do it, if you have an audience already, is you could start polling your audience. But, often too, if you have an audience, you've probably already served up some of this content before, whether it be on social media or email or blogging, or if you have a YouTube channel like yourself, and maybe you've already done some videos, so you know what's kind of risen to the top of popularity. But if you haven't ever talked about the topics you're thinking of, or you don't have an audience, one really great way to do it is to be a guest on other people's podcasts and take some of these topics that you can talk about and go share them. And then you'll see instantly, by people responding to you, or if the host even says, yes, I'd love to have you on my show to talk about this, because they're talking to your target listeners and target clients, then you'll know right away, okay, this topic is of interest. This will be great for my show.
Oh, this is a great a tip, actually, because I was also asking my question, how do you effectively test the angle? I just launched my podcast. I was like, because I knew my book coaches were looking for something very specific on marketing for book coaches.
Yeah.
But yeah, as a book coach or even as a writer, it's a great idea just to go on other podcasts and see if it interests. So Josephine, your cooking recipe, I want to know more. Go on other podcasts on cooking. Let us know where.
It's a great way to start, because you think about, I'm going to start a podcast, so I'm going to serve my coaching clients or authors that are listening to podcasts, right? We're thinking we want to take advantage of this technology because they listen or they watch, like you're doing on YouTube. Well, if you go be a guest on podcast, obviously that's who you're serving, is your target audience, and they listen to podcasts. And so they're going to be much more excited to come check out your own podcast, or to learn more from you. I mean, if they hear you have a podcast coming, it gets them excited. But yeah, I think that's just a great way to test things out for sure.
Love that. Josephine, another tip for you. Talking about her book, so I'm just going to show it again.
Yeah.
She uses she talks in the book about her personal journey with yoga and domestic abuse and that kind of thing. How could she, if she was a book coach, how could she integrate that personal journey into the podcast to make it a compelling podcast theme?
You mean how can she bring the topics of yoga and domestic abuse into her podcast?
Yes.
Well, and I have not read the book, so I'm just going by what you've told me about Anne. But I think it just depends on what kind of journey she shares in the book. Like if it's just her personal journey, but there's probably some point to it, right? This for the reader, she wants to for them to learn something about it, and that's probably what you want to dig into. Is what is it for the readers, that they're going to get out? Like, what are they getting out of this book that they're reading? And you're kind of expanding on that on the podcast, where you can talk a little bit more deeper or go a little wider on those topics. But probably, again, that goes back to if you pick out 3 things you want to talk about, how do you want to serve your listeners? Like, what do you really want them to get out of it? And then, how can yoga be blended into that? And, your story of domestic abuse, how much you want to share about that, and what is it why did you share it in the book? And it's the same thing for your podcast. You want your because your listeners and your readers are typically the same people. And so whatever you wrote the book for your readers and what you want them to get out of it is the same for your podcast and your listeners.
Yeah, because you make a good point. I'm not even sure she really wants to talk about the domestic abuse because it's a small paragraph, so it's not like a whole part of the book. So yeah, you're right. That's maybe also a good question, that when you choose your topic, it's important to know what you want to write up, but is it also not even more important to know what you don't want to podcast about?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it may be that's part of her story, but it's not going to be part of what she's using on a podcast to market her book necessarily.
Yeah.
And that's again where maybe if you wanted to talk about it, but you don't want to talk about your own personal journey, you could bring a guest on to talk about that, or a professional on to talk about that. Again, it just depends on what your goals are and how you're trying to, reach and serve your readers and listeners. But there's lots of ways you could go about that if you wanted to talk about that topic. But if you're like, nope, it's only in the book and it's not for public, just free knowledge, I don't want to talk about that. So you can certainly do that.
Oh, absolutely. You're talking about bringing on guests. Do you see that for certain topics, it's better to have like a solo podcast or have a guest podcast or have both? Like, how do you figure out what is a good format for your podcast?
Yeah, I think again, I just always keep pointing it back to the goal of what you're trying to accomplish as an author or a book coach. And so a book, like with book coaches, you want people to work with you one-on-one. And so if they don't get a chance to hear some of your expertise come out on your podcast, then they're not going to get to have that experience to get to, know, like, and trust with you. And if you bring on guests, it just depends on who the guest is, because a lot of times we tend to, hide behind our guests, for lack of a better word, because it's just so much easier to sit here and ask questions, and have the guest answer. But again, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is only to build relationships with other people, then that's fine. Bring on guests and have fun with it, if that's the only goal. But if your goal is, I want to attract and serve my readers, build my email list, sell my books, then, your readers really want to know you too. So I always say, like, I would start with solo for sure, have a couple of episodes at the very beginning of your show so they hear your voice, and then start bringing in other voices, but always make sure it matches the mission of your show and what your goals are first, and then start, bringing guests on. But I love where it's a collaborative thing like you and I are doing. And, I'm here to serve your audience and for you to ask me questions that serve your audience, not here to talk about me, So I think we have to always remember that. But I think it's fine to have, both. I just would say, I would really caution, especially authors and coaches, is don't just start with an interview show, and never have any solo shows, because it's really hard, for people to really get to know you.
Yeah, I'm a very bad example. I started right away with the interviews. I think I did one solo episode and that was it. So
yeah, you should do more.
Yeah, I think it depends on, your preference as well, because I really love to do the interviews and learning to know about you. And yes, of course, you're serving my audience, but I love to have you in front of my audience to talk about a podcast, because you have an expertise that I don't have. And that's why, of course, I invite you on the show. Are there some unexpected formats that you've seen coming by as a podcast coach that we don't necessarily think about, but that have been successful?
I have some friends that did this, or they are still doing it, and they talked about it on my show. But they have, I don't even know what you would call it. It's like an every other episode co-host, okay, is what I'll just reference it as. So one of them, and they're both authors, one of them has a podcast, and she airs episodes every other week, and it's a solo podcast. Then the other author has a YouTube channel, and she has solo videos on her YouTube channel. But every other episode is the two of them on both channels. So every other week, you get the both of them talking about whatever topic it is, and it airs on the audio podcast, and it also airs on their YouTube channel. So, I mean, it's on each author has their own platform, but they come together and collaborate in that way, and that's so unique and so cool, you know. So, you know, they get a chance to serve each other's audience and be, you know, visible to other readers that may not know them, but they have such a great camaraderie together, you know, and so their topics are in alignment and they serve similar audiences, but in a different way. And so I think that's been just, you know, they could have just been like, hey, come on my show. Excuse me, for as a one-time guest, you know, but no, they've really felt like it was an ongoing thing that they wanted to keep up with and do that. So I think that's really, I haven't seen that anywhere else. So I've seen people like do that have seasonal podcasts, maybe have a seasonal co-host, which is also fun. You know, it's still one person's podcast, but every season they change out the co-host, and that's kind of cool too. That's really, I guess, outside the box things I've seen.
I love that idea of the episode. For the link to to the episode that Kim talks about will be in the description. I absolutely want to hear that episode, so please send it to me, and I will put it in the description. But yeah, because I feel like as a business owner, it's a lonely world, right? So as an author, it's similar. So having that collaboration, I just love that, because my thoughts were going, like, if you're a book coach, we talked about the romantasy book coach, you could go with, you know, co-hosts who do book marketing or book publishing. So you know, every other week you do that. I just love that idea. I'm really excited to see that show. What's the name of the show?
The Hope Coach is the audio podcast, and Christine Brown is the author on YouTube. And I don't know if she has a YouTube, like a specific name, but I think it's under her author name. But yeah, I would definitely send that to you, because it was wonderful to hear how they go about it. And yeah, you were talking about that with book coaches. I mean, that's the thing to think about when you're a professional, like what you're doing. You're bringing on other professionals that serve, you know, a similar audience in a different way. And book coaches can do that too. You know, book coaches can bring on authors, right, and just hear about their journey and get to know them. But they could also bring on other professionals that serve their listeners, but in a different way, because there's so much collaboration potential there. So it's super fun, you know, to do that. So yeah, there's just, you know, you think about like, what am I doing for my own coaching business? I'm going to have certain episodes talk about that and lead people to that. But then it's also one of your goals might be relationship building. And so that's super fun to think about how you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so useful. I mean, because anyway, there's a place for everyone, that I always say. So it's a great way to have everyone together. And then this idea to co-host, I'm thinking myself, like, who could I have a co-host?
Yeah.
This would be so nice and so fun to do. That's just a great idea, because we had the Capsule podcast idea, this co-hosting idea. And it's already very different from just do your solo podcast. So absolutely love that idea. Maybe one last question. So for book coaches who haven't written their book, how can they use their coaching experiences and client transformation to shape the content of their podcast?
Yeah, I would do it the same way as like what you coach people to do in their book, you know, and just kind of, you have kind of a mapped out outline maybe of how you want to take people through it. And again, it depends on the goal, of course, like just, you know, is your goal with the podcast to, you know, get visibility for your coaching business because you want to get more clients, you know, more coaching clients as a book coach? Then you definitely want to be talking about your experience. You don't have to have a book, right? But you may be writing a book, but you're just talking about your experience working with authors and helping them on their book writing journey. And again, like we talked about in the beginning, like you may be an expert at just like talking to an author and bringing all their ideas into one and really helping them see, okay, here's the topic that shines, and let's write a book on this. Or you may come in at a certain piece of the author's journey, like with me with marketing, you know, you may come in at editing. And so those are the things you want to talk about, because again, it goes back to the goal. If you're trying to lead people into your business, then that's what you want to be, you know, sharing about about your journey, who you've had, you know, experience with. That might be another way to have, you know, authors on your show that you've worked with. Maybe you want them to come on and just talk to you about their experience and share, because other, you know, listeners would love to hear that and see that. And you could definitely do that. So yeah, I would shape it that way. So do most of your book coaches, are they writing books? Are they thinking about writing books?
There's a majority, yes, they have written or they're thinking about it, but
Mhm.
there's also more and more book coaches that say, I'm just a book coach and I'm good
Mhm.
at coaching writers. I'm
Yeah.
not good at writing the book myself.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and that's okay.
exactly.
That's okay. That's what I've said for the past 10 years.
No, but yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not, it's, it's like having the diploma. Sometimes I have book coaches, they come in, oh, I should do this diploma. I'm like, you come in with your expertise, with your knowledge, with a different way of it. Coaching is not something that you can learn in school. You really
Mhm.
need to have that life experience. And school can give you like a framework,
Mhm.
but you still will adapt that framework over
Yeah.
your coaching career. So for me, yeah, I don't think it's necessary that as a book coach you have written your book.
Mhm.
Yeah, but to come back to you and the podcast, I love this idea about the client testimonial, because this could actually be a great idea as well. Instead just having your client testimonial, you can
Mhm.
do a little podcast on I don't know, your 5 best clients as a book coach, and
Yeah, yeah.
what worked and how they published their book. So that could be a
Uh-huh.
great idea as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I always think about when they're done with their book, maybe they're done with you for now, but they probably have another book in them. They may already be working on the second book. I mean, I feel like it's always like it's before your book releases and after your book releases, like with marketing. But I really have, realized like after your book releases is really just before your next book, so it's like we're always up to the next book. And so, yeah, they could be talking about what they went through with their client and how they got their published book out into the world. And maybe, but now they're talking about, hey, let's start from scratch again, and start doing this again. So yeah, there's just so many fun ways you can do it. That's what I love about podcasting. It's so fluid. I mean, you can just do it whatever you want. It's your show, and just be as creative as you want, and whatever you think will serve your listeners best.
I love that, Kim. You, even for me, you gave me so many ideas
Oh, good. I'm so
what I
glad.
could do with the podcast. Yeah, exactly. Do you have one last tip for book coaches who are trying to figure out their topic for their podcast?
Yeah, I would say don't let that slow you down, because again, you can just get started and start talking about what you're passionate about, and it'll become very clear. As you start exercising those muscles, it's going to become very clear, because everybody always says like your first couple episodes, you don't ever want to listen to them again because you're like, oh, I learned so much since then. But those are such great learning grounds. So don't be fearful. Don't let that stop you from doing it. And again, you can just have fun with it. You might just do it with another friend of yours, another book coach, and just have fun with it for a while until you really get that narrowed down. But don't let that slow you down by any means. It could be a short podcast. You don't have to talk forever. And yeah, just do it your way and make it work in the time you have allowed.
I love that, Kim, because indeed is one thing that we didn't talk about. Don't get burned down by, oh, I
Mhm.
need to find the perfect topic. Just
Yeah.
just go out there. Once you have one, you go out there, you see, and then it will come
Hmm.
little by little.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you so much, Kim. Now, I think that lots of my book coaches who say, okay, now I want to start my podcasting. So you have an excellent checklist for future podcasts. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, yeah, because I am so big on, let's start a podcast. It's not going to take all of our time, not take all of our time to get it started, or to maintain it. And so, yeah, just come up with, so many people ask me, like, do you just have like a checklist I can follow? I'm going to start it on my own, but I just need to know the steps. And so that's what I put together. It's just an easy checklist you can follow. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. I'd love to help you. But yeah, let's just make it super simple, because we just need to get on our way and start getting behind the microphone, start serving, and start reaching those authors and get them into your coaching business.
I love that. So all the links will be in the description. I will also have your website out there. Your website is www.kimstewart.com, right?
KimStewartMarketing.com. Yeah.
Kimstewartmarketing.com. Good, I checked. Okay. And that was it. So today's discussion highlighted how to find the perfect topic for your podcast. The one thing I'm going to keep from this podcast episode is your goal. Think very, very much about your goal. What is it that you actually want to achieve with your podcast? And in function of that, you will think about your 3 topical points to discuss about in your podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed our discussion and want to continue this discussion, join my next free business clinic for book coaches. They happen every third Thursday of the month. You can find the sign up link in the episode description below. There's going to be lots of links in that description today. And that's it for today. As a closing comment, I am taking a sentence from Josephine Shah's book. See your writing and cooking as your sacred offering to others. And that is exactly what you as a book coach should do too. See your book coaching skills as your sacred offering to others. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.